In the world of horror games, there seems to be two branching paths. The games that focus on thrilling jump scares and visceral visuals, leaving you on the edge of your seat for the whole game. Or the games that create a mood or atmosphere that instills a sense of dread or unease, and instead of on the edge of your seat, you sit as far back as possible not knowing what to expect. Often games will have aspects from both sides to them, some leaning heavier towards one side or another, but when I think of combining the two sides into a game that embodies the best of both worlds, the first game that comes to mind is Condemned Criminal Origins. Condemned Criminal Origins is a dope-ass game. A first-person survival horror action game with a focus on melee combat and detective investigations. It was developed by Monolith Productions and published by Sega in November of 2005 as a launch title for the Xbox 360, but it was released on the PC as well a few months later. It's a game that thrives in its atmosphere. It's a gritty, intention-building game inspired by films like Silence of the Lambs, Seven, and Saw, just to name a few. The gameplay, while simple, is done extremely well, and the detective elements of the game are effective at driving the game forward in a really well-paced fashion. While personally I think the story of the game is riddled with plot holes and continuity issues, it serves as a great journey through one of the most well-crafted environments in a horror game. It is welcome company among others such as BioShock, The Suffering, and Manhunt. Gritty and grimy atmospheric games that inspire little more than tension and dread by just existing in the worlds that they build. Condemned is no different, and it stands as one of my favorite horror games of all time, and despite its flaws, it has one of the best atmospheres established in gaming, and some of the most visceral, in-your-face melee combat that I've ever seen in a video game. The game puts you in the shoes of Ethan Thomas, a crime scene investigator within the FBI's Serial Crime Unit, or SCU, in the fictional city of Metro. Ethan is called to the scene of a murder in an abandoned building that is riddled with violent squatters and drug addicts. The murder victim is a young woman who was strangled, with the body being posed with a mannequin figure. The MO of one of the serial killers that Ethan's been investigating for a while now, called the Matchmaker. After investigating the crime scene, Ethan and his colleagues smell cigarette smoke in the air and assume that the killer must still be in the area, so they split up and search the abandoned building. Ethan sets off to restore the power, and in the process he electrocutes himself, dropping his gun to the floor, only for it to be picked up by a man in the shadows. Ethan pursues this unknown subject through the building before finding him in a back room, and the man immediately holds Ethan up at gunpoint, punching him a few times with some funny sound effects that sound like he's getting a combo hit multiplier.
How does it feel to be on this end of the gun?
Before killing the other two officers as they show up to help. One of the big plot holes off the jump in this game. These two guys have the slowest reaction speed known to man. One guy turns around on you while you already have your guns drawn, and he one-taps each of you without either of you firing a shot back. Trained law enforcement officers as well. It's a little far-fetched, but we out here, baby. After killing the two officers, this mysterious man tosses Ethan from the window all the way down to the street below. Ethan wakes up in his apartments with a creepy dude named Malcolm, who warns him that he is now wanted for the deaths of the two police officers in this abandoned building as they were shot from his gun, and he is MIA. Determined to prove his innocence, Ethan sets out into the cesspool that is Metro City in search of the actual killer. Is it Matchmaker, or is it just some other guy? All along the way, he is attacked by homeless men and women who have seemingly gone insane, as well as seeing horrific things, either paranormal or just a result of Ethan slowly losing his sanity. But before we get too deep into the game's plot, let's start from the top and talk about how this game was made. Monolith Productions is a studio known for their first-person shooters, with games like the Blood series, the No One Lives Forever games, and Alien vs Predator 2. They are obviously well versed in making games of the genre, and they wanted to take their expertise in the field and apply it into a first-person game that wasn't necessarily defined as a shooter. They had an idea in mind to use the subject matter of serial killers and decided to make a game based on that premise. They wanted it to be more than just a spooky game. They wanted the player to be be able to actively investigate a wanted killer. They wanted to use forensic tools to gather evidence and piece together little shards of the puzzle until you get an idea of where to head next. And overall, that is what they accomplished. They went into the game knowing that it was going to be a launch title for the 360, so they really wanted to highlight the advanced tech of the hardware with some nice looking graphics and lighting, but they also wanted it to stand out with some fresh mechanics that veered off the typical path that they went for in games. The result they landed on initially was an investigative game where the player went through various government sanctioned missions, although in the concept the player was also able to use spells, like a spell that stole the weapon that the enemy was carrying, or a spell that destroyed walls and obstacles in the way. This initial concept was called The Dark, and thankfully over the course of production, Monolith decided to bring the game more down to earth, taking away the spells from Ethan. Instead, the gameplay focused on the first-person melee combat with occasional use of firearms. They liked the brutal and intimate feeling of the combat that made this action game sit firmly within the horror genre as well. Prior to this game's release, an episodic flash game was released to the game's website, now completely non-existent. I don't even know if you can find a way to play it now because it was made with Flash Player, which is gone with the wind. But you can also just find the full thing on YouTube. It's less actual gameplay and more just a little teaser for the game, but overall it's pretty cool. You take on the role of an FBI agent named Agent Mallory, and you are on the hunt for a killer who leaves Polaroids on the bodies of his victims. You go through several short episodes searching for clues and hints until eventually finding out the killer, but arriving to where the killer is supposed to be, you find him dead, with a man who killed him still there, and shortly thereafter kills Agent Mallory as well. An ominous teaser that shows off what this game has to offer as far as theme, subject matter, and atmosphere. There was also a movie tie-in to the game announced before the thing even released, which is bold as hell for Warner Brothers, but that film never saw the light of day, so who knows what that may have brought to the table. There is some information on that a little later on in this video. The development of this game is pretty bare bones. There aren't many sources out there or developer interviews that I usually like to dive into for these videos, so that's really all I got for you. So let's talk about playing this damn game. Going with the survival horror aspect of this game, it's no surprise that the movement in this game is stiff. You move incredibly slow. You have a sprint button, but you get winded in like 4 seconds. Look, if I wanted a game that realistic, I'd just go sprint down to the end of my street. But I'm playing a game as an FBI agent who hunts down serial killers for a living. I expect to sprint for more than 4 seconds. You can't even jump or crouch at all in the game. A small gap in the floor or a minuscule pile of garbage or rubble is enough to make you detour all the way around an obstacle to find a way to your objective. Anyway, you move slow in the game. Other than the slow-paced movements and climbing stairs like a geriatric with a fresh hip replacement, the gameplay can be safely divided into 2 portions: the combat and the detective elements. The detective elements are at the core of what makes this game special. You are after all a crime scene investigator, so what sense would it make if you never actually investigate anything? Periodically throughout the game, you get prompted to take out a tool and search for clues or evidence. The tool selection is automatic. There isn't an inventory system at all to select one. It's just sort of chosen for you. I guess it's detective instinct to have Ethan just whip out the right gadget to observe blood, footprints, bruising, fibers, and plenty of other things that will give some insights onto what happened there and where to go. The information is decoded via phone with an agent in the FBI lab named Rosa, who helps Ethan even though he is thought guilty of murdering 2 cops. These moments are often moments of calm in the game. It feels less like a horror game and more of a crime scene investigation game, with Ethan and Rosa chatting on the phone about the evidence and just what is happening in general. Rosa even shows up in person at one point in the game to get some research done in the field. While I really enjoyed these moments in the game, I kind of wish that there was some more liberty in deciding what to look at and using which tools to investigate them. While I haven't played it as of recording this script, I believe the sequel to this game fleshes out the investigation tools a little bit more, and I look forward to playing with that. It makes me think of Phasmophobia in a way, with the search for fingerprints or other clues, except I like how Phasmophobia gives you the freedom to use whatever tools you want in whatever application. It makes me want an actual crime scene investigation game similar to Phasmophobia, and instead of hunting ghosts, you're hunting down serial killers. I don't know if a game like that exists, but it should. Anyway, the detective stuff is really cool. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of the game, the first-person melee combat. First-person melee combat is something not well done in even modern games, so the fact that this game made such visceral and effective combats in first person is reason alone for it to stand out. It's a really simple combat system, but it's executed so well. The weight of the blows is what makes the hits feel hard. Whether you're swinging a wooden plank or a metal conduit you just ripped off the wall, making contact with some raging maniac's head is a visceral feeling. Look, the combat is simple. The game doesn't try to wow you with flashy and extravagant combos or special moves. There isn't even a hard hit or a light hit, you just swing. You can choose which direction you swing, but at the end of the day, you're just swinging, and each fight is a fight for your life. The enemies are vicious and strategic. Instead of just beelining straight to you, they'll hop around to make their approach a little more unpredictable. They feign some attacks to make you block prematurely, and then even when you do get a hit on them, they'll often use that momentum from the hit to keep swinging back around and get you in the face with a counter. The combat in this game just cannot be praised enough. You also get a taser that is used to temporarily subdue an enemy, making them freeze or potentially drop their weapon. It's vital when dealing with multiple enemies at once, or with buying yourself some time when the baddies have firearms and all you have is a lead pipe. It's a little out of place in this game though, like it almost makes the game a little too easy. It recharges incredibly fast, and it completely freezes an enemy, leaving them open for a heavy hit or just grabbing their weapon out of their hand, leaving them defenseless. You also get an upgrade to it later on in the game, making the enemies collapse completely from the shot. Finishing moves are also a thing when dealing with close quarters combat. You often get the chance to deliver a killing blow to a stunned enemy, and all that's missing is the Mortal Kombat announcer yelling "finish him" as you choose which fatality you want to do. You can headbutt them, you can punch them, you can snap their neck, or just shove their face in the dirt. And the punch feels oddly personal and has your character whisper ominously as he commits first-degree murder. Lawful murder, I guess, because he's a cop, but actually he's not on duty, so maybe not so much. I'll have to consult Saul Goodman on the legality of sewer murders. But the fact that the guy is usually on his knees, stunned and confused right before the killing blow, makes me lose some hope that this was actually self-defense. Guns come up every now and again. You start the game off initially with your duty pistol, but you quickly prove that a good guy with a gun cannot stop a bad guy that steals his gun. But from that point on, most of the combats is melee based, which is for the better for the game, if we're being honest. You get your hands on various handguns and shotguns and a few other firearms throughout the game, but they usually only have a couple rounds in them before there are nothing more than another melee weapon to use. You aren't able to reload the guns by finding new ammunition or anything. You shoot what's there and then you toss it to the wayside. Very survival horror-esque. And it's a plot problem with the game. Ethan is a trained FBI agent. My dude knows his guns. Why can't he just keep the gun and store ammunition from the various other guns that he finds throughout the game? You can pick up a pistol with 2 rounds in its magazine. Why aren't you able to just tuck that bad boy in your waistband, and then when you find another pistol with say 4 more rounds, you take those rounds and add them to the magazine you already have? Instead, when you shoot your 2 rounds, you're forced to just toss the gun away forever. It's a kind of silly gameplay decision in my opinion. There also isn't an inventory system like with the detective tools and the health kits. The weapon in your hands is all you have. You do have a taser at all times that recharges between each use, but as far as your combat options, you got 2 hands to hold your choice of bludgeoning instrument. A few of the weapons double as a means to get around obstacles as well, so you may have to backtrack and keep an eye out for say a fire axe to chop down a door, or a sledgehammer to break a lock, or a shovel to bypass a security gate. navigate, even though I feel like a sledgehammer could do all the above tasks. But the game makes each obstacle require a specific tool, but also carrying around these weapons forces you to use them in combat as well. And even though the heavier weapons like sledgehammers do indeed hit hard, it is often best to have a more agile weapon like a conduit or a pipe in my opinion, especially when going against a much more agile enemy. Speaking of enemies, the AI in this game is another thing that makes the game stand out, and it makes the game even scarier in conjunction with the environment. The enemies will sneak up on you and ambush you at any given moment. You'll hear them shuffling around, looking for a proper weapon, and sometimes you'll see them run around a little bit ahead of you, or through a locked doorway setting up their position. They don't just run right at you like brainless minions, but instead they'll post up on a wall and wait for you to pass by. They'll silently run up behind you, whacking you in the head, scaring the shit out of you. Certain enemies will climb through or crawl through small holes and then leap out at you when you least expect it. Enemies will even start beating the crap out of each other if they happen to hit one another in their excessive swinging of metal pipes and 2x4s, just selling the point that everyone in the city is batshit insane. It's a very good AI system. Again, something Monolith is well versed in. Just look at their game that released the same year as this one, Fear. Condemned is up there with the AI in that game, although with the implementation of melee combat, it doesn't seem quite as impressive as the gun-toting enemies in Fear on the surface. There's also the infamous department store level that employs the use of mannequins that are spooky distractions, or that's all you think, until there's those bitches that start moving. These guys will stay still among the various mannequins to get the drop on you, and even after knowing they're coming for you, the game uses these models of the characters and mannequins so well that it's often hard to tell which mannequin is a real person until they're already swinging at your noodle. This left me shamelessly swinging at every mannequin I saw if I even had a sliver of doubt that it was just a clothing prop. Overall, the gameplay of this game is amazing. It's the second best thing behind the atmosphere that's present. The melee is so good, and even the rare firearm moments feel really refined. With the fantastic enemies all throughout the game filling the levels with some impressive AI, I really couldn't ask for more with the combat aspect of the game. Even the variety of enemies, while minimal, was done well enough that it never got stale even on multiple playthroughs. The detective parts are unique and definitely some of the more memorable moments as far as puzzle solving and story progression, but on subsequent playthroughs they kind of lose their charm as they're pretty handholdy and they don't really allow for any creative process in finding your own evidence. Speaking of story progression, let's talk about perhaps my least favorite part of the game.
Shit, what the hell was that?
Thomas, I'm at the library. Where are you?
Rosa, be quiet.
Hey, Smithy! Johnson, wait up!
Rosa, are you still there?
Very few people can tell me to shut up and get away with it.
Spoiler warning for all those who care, it's time now to break down the wacky plots of this game. So as I said earlier, when Ethan arrives at a crime scene suspected to be the work of the matchmaker in an abandoned building, he and his crew think the guy is still there because they smell cigarette smoke in the air and they go looking for the bad guy. Ethan gets shocked by an electrical panel dropping his gun, and the bad guy picks up his gun and eventually uses it to kill two of his buddies before tossing him out the window like 17th century fecal matter. Ethan wakes up seemingly unscathed in his apartment with some man named Malcolm Van Horn, a man who says he was a friend of Ethan's father and is here to warn him that he is wanted by the police for the murder of the two officers in the building, and he's urged not to explain himself to the police but to prove his innocence by running away. Ethan goes into the metro station at the instruction of Malcolm and finds some interesting evidence while there. With the help of his investigation tools and a lab tech at the FBI named Rosa, who is still on his side even after all this, he is able to decode and analyze things he finds, like photographs of Ethan in his apartment taken from the metro station and the chemicals used to process the pictures there as well, leading Ethan on a trail to discover who took them and why. All the while, Ethan is attacked by vagrants and addicts who have seemed to have gone mad, and they attack with no reason at all, and Ethan is forced to kill them. He also gets periodical flashbacks or visions that are either paranormal or a glimpse into his slipping sanity. The game never really makes that quite clear in my opinion. As the game goes on, the lines seem to blur even more. It goes from what was a crime scene investigation thriller into a deeper mess, something from a higher power. The city is filled with hate, birds are dropping dead from the sky, and even police officers are losing their minds and going feral with the general population. Ethan continues his search through the metro station before finding the dude who threw him out of the window and who leads him on a chase through the metro tunnels. After watching him murder a few people in his way and hopping on the back of a moving subway car to follow him, Ethan still loses him again, but he starts collecting clues to find out which way he went, eventually leading him to an abandoned train car with mannequin pieces stored in the ceiling compartment. Aha, so this is the matchmaker. Perhaps this train car is one of his hideouts. Nonetheless, he finds a store logo on the mannequin pieces, Bart's Department Store, a long-time abandoned store overrun by squatters that Rosa defines as beyond nasty.
Shit, the cops don't even drive down Burnside unless they have to. It's a nasty area filled with nasty people, and the people down there are different. They go beyond nasty.
On the ride to the store, Ethan gets a call from his chief telling him to turn himself in, explaining that this situation looks really bad. No shit. Even though Ethan tries to explain it's the matchmaker who killed the cops and not him. And during this cutscene, a looming figure with a metal jaw creeps up behind Ethan and he grabs his head before he snaps out of it and thinks he may be actually losing his mind.
Crazy.
Arriving at the department store, Ethan is confronted by not only a terrifying environment, but also some creepy fucking dudes disguised as mannequins that try to kill him. But more importantly, he finds more evidence of the matchmaker, hinting that this may be his home base. Following a blood trail, he comes to a dressing room where he finds a body posed with a mannequin, the matchmaker's MO. He has to be here, but he soon finds out with the help of Rosa that this body is the matchmaker. Dun dun dun. Someone is out here killing serial killers in the same way that they killed their victims. So the guy that tossed Ethan out of the window isn't actually the matchmaker, but instead he's a serial killer, dubbed Serial Killer X by Rosa. They know he's out to get the next serial killer called the Torturer now, a serial killer who never actually kills his victims, but tortures them until they commit suicide. I gotta say, once this reveal happens that there's someone out there killing serial killers, combined with Ethan losing his mind and seeing shit, made me think that Ethan himself was the killer and he had some sort of dissociative identity disorder, not realizing the difference in personalities. And it wasn't until the end of the game that I realized, oh no, this Serial Killer X guy, he's actually real. Ethan isn't that crazy. Anyway, Ethan is now on the hunt for the Torturer in order to save his sorry ass from this new killer, but Rosa can't access the Torturer's file and send it to Ethan without raising any red flags within the FBI. So instead, they decide to meet at the public library, now abandoned due to a fire, of course, to find some public information on the Torturer to get a hint as to where he may be. Upon meeting Rosa, she gives him a beefier taser as well as some medical records that show he has some funky chemical levels in his brain and an abnormally high bone density, explaining how he can take so many hits and still be okay. But really, this is just kind of tossed in here and not really acknowledged in any way again. It's kind of weird. Then Rosa gets herself kidnapped by who is presumed to be Serial Killer X. Another thing that made me think this was a split personality thing, Rosa was literally right next to Ethan when she got abducted, and you don't see anything go down. She's just gone. And you conveniently find her knocked out and left in the rare book section of the library. I don't know. Everything just points to Ethan having DID. I swear, it adds up in my mind. Anyway, you find out that the torturer is likely some guy named Carl Anderson, and he is possibly held up at yet another abandoned building, this time a school. A gym teacher at the school is the one who brought attention to Carl Anderson possibly being the torturer, so it's likely that Carl is hunting down the gym teacher for revenge. And what a better place to do that than the school where they initially crossed paths. Ethan starts to find body parts that Rosa confirms as the gym teacher named Tibbets. First his lips, and then a whole arm hanging from the basketball hoop. The torturer definitely got his hands on this guy. During all of this, Ethan continues to have visions of Metal Jaw Guy, as well as finding himself dead on the ground, whatever that means. Back to the blood trail in the school, you find Mr. Tibbets shoved in a locker, you take a picture for Rosa and are asked to zoom in for a better look, something you did before on the matchmaker, so no big deal, right? Nope, the best jump scare in the game happens right here, and Ethan responds like he wasn't even scared at all. What a fucking Chad.
It didn't come through properly though. Can you take a close-up?
Help me. Help is on the way. Who did this to you?
Tibbets explains that Carl tortured him, but before he could have more fun, some other dude came and took Carl away. Tibbets dies shortly after he reveals this information, so Serial Killer X has the torturer now. Rosa finds a pesticide trace left on the victims and traces it to an apple orchard on the outside of town, the likely hideout of this Serial Killer X. Ethan has a few more spooky, maybe real or not encounters before heading out of the school and running into Malcolm, who drives him to the orchard because he feels like he has an obligation to help, I guess, among other things.
I have a sense of responsibility. I needed to help.
Help? You mean with my investigation?
Yes, among other things.
Ethan goes through the cabin on the apple farm, and after finding various clues and a hidden passage through a mirror, he comes across the corpse of Carl Anderson, the torturer, driven to suicide after being tortured by Serial Killer X. Ethan gets the bright idea to pose himself as the torturer and lay in wait for this Serial Killer X to arrive in order to get the drop on him and apprehend him. It ends up in a fight to the death, but before anyone wins, Malcolm shows up and he knocks Ethan out with a shovel. He does this as it's revealed that Serial Killer X is actually his nephew, Leland, and he seems to be possessed by some sort of evil, and Malcolm just wants him to snap out of it. But Leland simply just chokes him out. Ethan wakes up to Leland monologuing about the good that he's done by killing these nasty people, and how he has been using Ethan to gather all the information he needs to hunt them down, and that's why he's been stalking him. And during this speech, there's a figure looming in the rafters. It's the metal jaw dude, and apparently he's the source of not only Leland's madness, but the entire town's madness. And this is where the story kind of loses me. Malcolm shows up and knocks out Leland with a shovel. You should have just fucking done that in the first place, bud, and not knocked me out first. Anyways, you chase this figure around the barn, removing metal pieces from his body as that seems to weaken him before finally ripping his jaw off and then throwing him through the foundation of the barn, which then explodes for some reason. I don't know, shit went off the rails real quick, and I don't really understand the point. I'm guessing it's a lot like the idea of Torque's hatred and the suffering. It's the cause of all these monsters and bad shit going on, but it also sort of bleeds into real life. I don't know. I like the story a lot more when we were just chasing a serial killer that's killing serial killers. There doesn't need to be a paranormal element here, but alas, this is what we get. The ending of the game has Malcolm scooping up Ethan and escaping from the burning barn, discussing the evil that he defeated, but saying that it's still there and in his soul. So, you know, like, what's the fucking point then? Ethan then hears a bump in the trunk and finds Leland tied up in the back. He attempts to get his Goodfellas on, but Malcolm stops him, ultimately leading to a decision to kill Leland or let him live. Doesn't matter though, either way, he ends up dead, because if you don't pull the trigger, he just kills himself. The idea here, I guess, is that you can choose to let the evil manifest in you and take revenge on Leland, or choose to forgive him, but it doesn't seem to matter at all as the ending of the game plays out the exact same way. And maybe that's the point. Maybe hatred is inevitable. Flash forward to Ethan at the station. He is cleared of the murders, or so he says, as Rosa sits at a table with him revealing that she is wired. So Ethan is still under investigation for something. She mentions something about a cult being behind all of this, working with the Van Horns and such, but it's all shoehorned in the last 5 minutes of the game. Like, what are we supposed to do with this information? Ethan gets up to go to the bathroom and he throws up. He has some visions of the hatred behind him, and then he turns around and he has a metal face himself, maybe proving to the player that the hatred is manifested within him, which doesn't add up here, Monolith. I chose not to kill Leland. Clearly, I am beyond the hate. The first 90% of the plot was good. Serial killers, grimy cities, and a mystery serial killer vigilante. All cool shit. But once this paranormal idea of hatred and talks of a cult that isn't seen or heard of beside the last 5 minutes of the game, it makes me have more questions than ever at the end of the game. I think they had a great foundation, but the execution just fell flat. The game should have ended in the farmhouse and never gone into the orchard at all. And why are there so many plot holes? Why are these cops so useless? Why are there so many serial killers in one city? How can Rosa identify chemical compounds from a picture taken on a shitty Nokia cell phone? Are all these guys humans, or are they monsters in any way? Why did this motherfucker have a metal jaw? I'm just so confused with the ending of this game. I haven't played the sequel yet. Maybe it answers some of the stuff going on here. But more urgently, let's talk about the building blocks that make this game brilliant despite having such convoluted plot lines. The setting of this game is supplementary to every other aspect of the game, and these inner workings all make a sum that is greater than its parts. Starting with the environments and level design. The whole game takes place within Metro City, a gritty nightmare of a cityscape, similar to Carcer City and Manhunt or Baltimore. And The Suffering ties that bind, but also just Baltimore in general. Starting the game off in an abandoned building really builds the foundation for this game. A rundown building overrun by manic squatters and drug addicts that try to kill you at every turn. They aren't even scared to run at you with a piece of wood when you're holding a pistol. But from there, you also go through maintenance tunnels and sewer systems, out-of-commission department stores, and even a library at one point. All of the levels have their pros and their cons, some more memorable than others. The rundown office building at the opening of the game is probably the most iconic, along with the school level, but also the farmhouse at the end of the game is just as brilliant. It's a spooky abandoned house that actually lets you explore and take in everything there, at least initially, following a trail only seen under a blacklight, bringing you to various different clues in the house to find out where you need to go next. It's a masterclass in spookiness, and it makes you feel a little more on your own compared to all the prior levels that were pretty linear in nature. Finally, making the decision to venture into the basement of the house is one of the most nerve-wracking experiences in the whole game. The levels all share their theme of being run down or dilapidated, save for a few locations like the main metro station or the library, but at the same time they never feel monotonous or repetitive in any way. Each area is given life in such a fantastic way. Appropriate clutter thrown about, deliberate litter or graffiti everywhere you turn. The overarching horror of the city compounds on top of these locales as well. The birds falling dead from the sky, the population running mad, but that doesn't stop the trains from running on time, or the police from continuing their jobs. It's sort of Lovecraftian in a way, like you stepped into Innsmouth and everyone is shady with deeper motives going on under the front that they put on for you being an outsider. Being made for consoles definitely makes this game look a little more dated graphics wise. Even compared to Fear, from the same developer made the same year and on the same engine, you can see how the game made for PCs is able to be a little more timeless when compared to a flagship title on the Xbox 360. However, Condemned still looks great. On the Steam port with a widescreen patch and maxed out settings, the game looks fantastic. Yeah, some of the textures are a little iffy and the character models could be a little bit better, the game still holds its own wonderfully. Even the dynamic lighting and shadow work is excellent. Again, it pales in comparison to Fear's fantastic system, but the lighting in the game makes the levels work. Oftentimes using the flashlight is the only way to see a damn thing in the underground sewer tunnels and even in interior rooms of a building. But when you venture out to the outside, or even a room with a window, the moonlight or the rising sun will peer through whatever cracks there are and they make the room look super eerie, but at the same time pretty natural in a way. A lot of the way lighting is used is to give you a glimpse at some enemies creeping in the distance. Like in the library, there are a few lights on and in the distance through some bookshelves you might catch some movement while you yourself are sitting back in the dark. Or you might have a desperate guy rip some conduit off the wall for a weapon, causing sparks and what little light there was to disappear into the void. Along with the lighting, the sound design is superb in selling the tension and creepiness of each level. In a word, the ambient noise is just heavy. Think of Silent Hill 2, minimal music or more just noise. Not even grating and abrasive noise, but just heavy air, eerie white noise that makes you feel like your ears need to pop. It's beautiful, paired with the shuffling of enemies as they knock over planks of wood, or you hear them stomping around on the floor above you, and the actual sound of weapons hitting flesh. The difference in, say, a wooden sign or a crowbar is highlighted beautifully in the sound design. It's top tier, easily on the level of Stalker or Silent Hill when it comes to ambience. One of the most unique aspects of it is when you encounter an enemy, there's no combat music or amped up soundtrack at all. It's just the same heavy quiet as before, just now with a screaming lunatic hitting you in the face. It's just part of the world. It happens, and once they're dead, it's back to this eerie quiet immediately. It's surreal and something that took me a few levels to appreciate. Condemned is a masterclass in a terrifying atmosphere, something Monolith is very good at pulling off. Looking back at Fear and Blood, Condemned is one of the best in the business. It rivals rivals other atmospheric kings like BioShock, Stalker, and Manhunt. Gritty games that allow the environments and, more importantly, sound design to gradually build tension and always keep you on the edge throughout the entire game. It also, like those games, is pretty grounded in reality. Realistic environments and settings that don't seem super outlandish or fantasy driven. Condemned, even more than those games, consistently builds dread throughout the game. There's a handful of jump scares, but they are so infrequent that you never know when one is coming. And some of them happen during scripted moments that you've done half a dozen times at this point, like zooming into evidence to get a better look. In fact, a lot of the scariest moments aren't even jump scares, just simple things that the game presents to you in an almost casual sort of way. Take the mannequins, for example. The moment you learn that some of these mannequins are in fact psycho murderers is when this guy casually strolls off of his podium. That's it. There's no music, there's no cutscene, it's just a mannequin coming to life and walking away. And all you have to do is accept it. Like, yep, I guess this is just the shit that happens now. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of downtime in the game, because there is. There's lengthy portions of the game that has evidence collection and exploring that don't involve as much combat, and these don't seem to put the player at ease any more than the angry squatters or addicts rushing them with wet floor signs. The subtle approach to horror in this game is what in turn makes it scary. The casualness, the unpredictability. There are no QuickTime events or scripted cutscenes. It's just the same simple gameplay from beginning to end within a perfectly crafted environment with excellent enemies, lighting, and sound design. There isn't much else to ask for with this game. It just gets everything right. Condemned was received generally well, and the game continues to be a cult classic horror title, often making best horror games lists and talked about relatively often in the gaming space. It's often praised for its brutal and hard-hitting melee combat, as well as its brilliant atmosphere and tension-building levels and soundscapes. In Germany, it was pulled from shelves because the game has a representation of violence that is cruel or inhuman in nature. I guess they have a point when it comes to talking about a game where you beat homeless people to death with metal pipes. It is still prohibited for sale in Germany to this day. It joins the company of other games like Mortal Kombat, Manhunt, and Dead Rising. There was of course talks of a movie, as mentioned before. It was in talks before the game even released. They had a writer slated to take on the screenplay, Kurt Sutter, co-executive producer of The Shield. Early drafts of the screenplay apparently had something to do with aliens, which as far as I know don't show up in this game at all, so that's an odd one to hear. They apparently wanted to make this a film universe like Star Wars that this game took place in. Like, why do people do so much sometimes? Similar to the ideas the developers and filmmakers had for the game Darkwood. Yeah, all those stories and ideas sound cool, but just fucking chill, bro. Just make a good game first. Establish a fan base. Uncharted was like 4 games in and a few spin-offs deep before diving into a movie, and you see, it paid off. There was also a sequel to the game that came out in 2008, Condemned 2: Bloodshot. It has Ethan again as the protagonist and is developed by Monolith as well. I haven't played it yet, but I hear very mixed things about it and I'm excited to dive in. Overall, I really love this game. It has one of the most memorable settings and atmospheres in gaming. I remembered mostly non-substantial moments and areas of the game way more than I remembered any of the wacky plot. The terrifying office building at the start, the metro tunnels, the department store, and the school, all super iconic and incredibly well done, and really what makes this game a title worth visiting. The combat may leave modern gamers with a lot to be desired, and the story is forgettable at best, but the atmosphere is top notch, and I can easily recommend this game just on that alone. It is available on Steam. Patch it up, check it out. I highly recommend it. I'd like to thank my patrons for holding it down. D, I don't know how to text a motherfucker back, Schwinn, Kid Kingpin, Anonymous Starkweather, Doug Smith, Ejected USB, Sofa Pals Productions, Crash Bandicoot 25, Zachary Parkerson, Potty, Yay Man, Ben Stevens, and Not Much. Also, shout out to my first YouTube member, THC Grey Wolf. He actually has been a member for a few weeks now. I just suck and I haven't put out any new videos since my last stream, like 3 weeks ago. So thank you, dude, I appreciate it. Also, I plan on streaming some more in the future, so stay tuned for that and become a member if you'd like. Thank you all for being gangster. I appreciate you, and thank you to the rest of you for watching, liking, and commenting. It really means the world to me. I hope to see you next time. Peace.